Okay, look, we got to have a conversation about, what's a villain in college football? What's a villain? The real bad guys. Not the ones you don't like. Of course, if someone beats you, you don't like them. But the ones you truly feel are detrimental to the sport, to the way that we like it to be, the way you grew up with it. We may not be on the same wavelength as this. I'll tell you what I'm talking about. Late Kick. We're live, and we're from jam-packed Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm not high atop. We're on the field here at Lucas Oil Stadium, Tuesday, July 23rd, the year of our Lord 2024. It's Big Ten Media Day, so I'm going to talk to you about the balance of power in this conference because everyone's talking about Ohio State, and if they're not talking about Ohio State, they're talking about Oregon. And I'm like, well, someone other than those two just won the national title. Do we forget about Michigan? We'll discuss that. I got big questions. I got bold predictions. I want to ask you who the villains are in this sport. It could be a person. It could be a conference. It could be a brand. It could be whatever you want it to be. I asked you guys today. You did not disappoint in what you sent me. We're going to have Ryan Day on the show tonight. You know, there's been a lot of chatter out there in the Twitter sphere, the X sphere, if you will, about Caleb Downs and what they're going to do with him. So I didn't want to tweet about it. I just asked him to his face. He had a pretty interesting answer. Notice the grin on his face tonight when he answers that question. They're watching us in Avon, Indiana, Augusta, Georgia, Plano, Texas, and, you know, why not Indianapolis as well. Thank you guys so much. At Late Kick Josh, make sure you're following Twitter and Instagram especially. We got a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. We got all kinds of folks here that you may see a different side of. Who knows if you're following on the socials. So let's dive into the show tonight. Again, if you just tuned in, Ryan Day on the back end of the show. The balance of power in the Big Ten. Who runs this thing? How many teams are in Tier 1? Is there even a Tier 2? You know, if you watch this show or listen to this show, that's been sort of my my focal point with the Big Ten for a while. Like, yeah, everyone knows who the big boys are. They've been the big boys for a while. Then you go to Tier 2, and it's like maybe Penn State, and then that's it in Tier 2. And it's made the TV product very top-heavy. It's made the overall conference product very top-heavy. So Michigan just won this thing. And Michigan just won a national title. And because Jim Harbaugh left and because a lot of their roster got overturned, a lot of folks are looking at them. You see the win totals here. Colin's showing them to you if you're watching on YouTube at 8.5. And people are saying, okay, well, that means they're kind of in the background. We're talking balance of power, though. Not for me, they're not. This is still Michigan's conference until otherwise noted. Okay, this is not some predictions segment. So if we're talking about who's run things, well, if you've won the thing 3 consecutive years, if you just capped it off with a nice cherry on top that's a national title, how do you put anyone other than them up there? Now, if you ask me who I'm going to pick to win this thing, I'm not picking Michigan to win this conference this year, but that's irrelevant because I didn't pick them last year, and I was wrong. So who really cares who anyone's picking? If we're going off what's happened, if we're going off like paper pop, tangible on this piece of paper results, it's Michigan's conference. And then we start talking about the rest. So then we can go start talking about Ohio State. Because if not for Michigan being in the way, again, all caps, if not for Michigan being in the way, then boom, Ohio State. They're winning the Big Ten last couple of years maybe, and they're in the playoff, and who knows what they're doing. And Ryan Day's probably got a championship trophy on his mantle, conference and otherwise, that he doesn't have right now because they've been in the way. That doesn't mean we have to go 10 or trash mentality. That doesn't mean, oh, Ohio State sucks. They don't. There's quite literally one hurdle that they haven't been able to clear. It's Michigan and then Georgia once they got into the playoffs a couple of years ago. And, I mean, that's trajectory of a ball off a foot. That's the difference in them winning that thing versus losing that thing. So this program's right there with the best of the best. When we're talking about balance of power, you could make the argument that the conference runs through Columbus, but the thing about it is the team from Ann Arbor has gone through them 3 straight years, so I'm not making them take a back seat until it happens on the field. Now, Oregon, here's where it gets interesting. Oregon walks into this conference, and a lot of folks, and I'm putting myself in this crew, a lot of folks are willing to blindly assume that they'll be seated at the head table. I believe that, but I don't believe that because they just started an expansion program and they recruited a lot of good guys, but we haven't seen proof of performance. We've seen them. So, you know, there'll be pushback on this. Well, Dan Lanning went 0-2 against Washington last year. What has Dan Lanning won above and beyond just regular season games? Well, the answer is not much, but he also hasn't been a head coach that long. So I could go back to a lot of guys' tenures, and they didn't do much in their first 2 years, first 3 years. But I did just say what I said about Michigan, and I'm going to say the same thing about Oregon on the other side. I can believe in you all I want to. But there's a lot of newness here, and there's an acclimation period that has to happen. And look, there is, believe it or not, a level of physicality above and beyond what they played in the Pac-12 that does exist in the Big Ten. And the other thing is, here's what will be interesting to watch. Watch the level of quarterback play. You could look at this one of two ways. You could look and say Dillon Gabriel statistically may be the best in this conference this year. I may even agree with you. When you get to play the big boys, when you play in Michigan, when you play in Ohio State, they may play them twice for all I know. When you go play a Georgia or an Alabama or Texas, whoever in the playoffs, is Dillon Gabriel the kind of guy that can take over those games? Because that'll go a long way if we're talking about an individual team this year, but also, for the future prospects of Oregon, if they come into this conference and they end up in the conference title game and they're just falling short against Ohio State, or if they win the thing, that'd be more in line with what a lot of people expect from them. So balance of power, Tier 1 includes Oregon. I think then you start to have an interesting conversation. Penn State's as consistent as can be, and they've consistently not been at the head table, but they haven't been too far behind that. I don't see any reason for that expectation level to change. The only reason it could change would be maybe if Andy Kotelnicki comes in, and that coincides with them just upping their game in terms of explosivity offensively. If that happens, man, then you got a whole new deal on your hands, because then you've got a Penn State that'll still play good defense, but a Penn State that's not afraid to score. You're not afraid to dent 30 on the scoreboard against you. And I'm talking about in the big games. I'm not talking about running it up on everyone else where you can have a top 20 offense, which, by the way, they had last year. I'm talking about doing it in big games. But what happens to USC? Lincoln Riley's going to be here, I think, tomorrow at Big Ten Media Days. Defensively, how much do they jump? Recruiting-wise, how much do they jump? Right now, it's not good enough. To win this conference, it's not good enough. So they're in the conversation because there's a certain floor that's built in on USC that's well above and beyond, the likes of several other teams we have hanging on this banner just off to my left. But then the Tier 2 conversation, man, Wisconsin, total wild card. Nebraska, total wild card. As it relates to the balance of power here, I mean, Rutgers could sneak around and win 8 or 9 games on you. So the balance of power to me, it's not so much entertaining to talk about the top, because that's the same, and you just rearrange the deck chairs, if you will. The Tier 2 part, like if Wisconsin all of a sudden does emerge, if Nebraska all of a sudden does emerge, I was talking to some of our CBS production folks. We've got that contract now, that media rights contract. Think about how different the second and third and fourth Big Ten game looks on a given Saturday versus what it used to look like if you've got a solid Tier 2. That's good for everyone, your company. That's good for me and you as just viewers. So that's how I see the balance of power in the Big Ten right now. Happy to have you guys with us. Make sure, as many of you did the other day when I made mere mention of it, make sure not only that you're subscribed to the channel, and make sure you're subscribed to the pod. It's free. I ask you to do it because it helps us out in return for hopefully us keeping the show free, which we will with your help. But also, bring 5 of your friends. I always encourage that. Recruit. I had one of you reach out and say your wife had I don't want to get too specific here, your wife had a get-together with several of her friends, and they were over at the house, and you almost got on all of their phones and had them subscribe, but you ran into some facial recognition issues. And look, technology is going to be a roadblock for us. But broad strokes purposes, if we recruit and we keep the subscription numbers the way they should be and the way they have been, then we'll be good. We'll keep this thing free forever. Okay, hard-hitting stuff here. Hard-hitting stuff. The biggest villains in college football are who? That's what I put out to you guys today. I put a blank. You filled it in by the thousands. And we did not go the direction I thought we were going to go. So I did get some things I expected, like the playoff committee, of course. A lot of you said the NCAA, like, duh, that's always been a go-to there. TV networks, yes, the boogeymen. But a lot of you said, like, Texas. Okay. A lot of you said Georgia. All right. Ohio State. And so I'm asking myself, like, maybe with the Texas thing I get it. With Georgia, how in the world is Georgia a villain? Or have I misunderstood you? Or have we misunderstood each other? I mean, are we on different wavelengths here? Because when I think about a villain in college football, I think about someone who is fundamentally making the world worse. Someone winning every year is not making the world worse. Someone's got to win. If someone does it consistently because they're doing what they're supposed to do better than what you do, and you do as consistently or whatever, I mean, that's just an indictment on your folks, not their folks. So that's not a villain to me. So Georgia's not a very polarizing program in my mind. They just win a whole lot because they're really good. Ohio State's the same way. Ohio State just wins a whole lot because they're really good. I'm not sure there's villainous behavior unless you're watching me in Ann Arbor. I'm not sure there's villainous behavior in Columbus. Now, Texas, maybe a little bit different story, because not only does Texas have that big brand, I know you guys in Austin, okay? Disproportionately, you have the least trouble telling other folks how important your brand is per capita than any other fan base in America. So if you're going to consider that villainous behavior, if Texas is the villain, not because on the play or not because of on-field play, not because of recruiting, but just because you don't like their persona, okay, I get that. But then we went broad, and a lot of you said the playoff committee. So this is where I wanted to go, because I think if I were an FSU fan, I would despise the playoff committee with every cell of my being. And in years past, like if I were, I don't know, any number of teams who think they've been screwed out of playoff spots, yeah, I get that. Here's where we are right now. Where we are right now is we've got an expanded playoff. So if you got screwed out of a spot in the past, there'll be room for you now. What I want to know is how they handle, as we talked about the other night, conference championship game losers. Notre Dame could be 11-1 this year. Very much could be 11-1, and they could go into the final weekend of the season, let's say ranked 6th in the country or 5th in the country. But maybe Oregon's 4th. Maybe Georgia's 3rd. But they happen to lose in conference championship game situations. Do those teams fall behind Notre Dame as Notre Dame sits with their feet up watching the game like we are? That's villainous behavior, because I don't think that's the way it should work. If you're good enough to get to a conference title game, and it's not a division world anymore. So if you're good enough, you really were one of the best 2 in the conference. If you can get to the conference title game and you lose that thing, and then they punish you and drop you below a team that sat at home last weekend, that's villainous behavior. Okay, so I'm still a little out to lunch on that. I'm in wait-and-see mode on that. Several of you said Deion Sanders is the biggest villain in college football. Here's what I would say to that. How has Deion Sanders acted in his time at Colorado that's different than the way he's always acted? Deion's been the most authentic person in this sport since he's been at Colorado, is what I'm trying to say. You knew what you were signing up for. Every one of us knew Deion Sanders before he took that job. So he takes the job. He does what many of you claim you want, which is he just oozes authenticity. He doesn't seem like you because his authentic self is different than your authentic self, but he's him. Okay, you can like it or not like it, but I'm saying, why would you think that's villainous? You may have a problem with how he's been covered. Maybe you've got a problem with the amount of headline space Deion Sanders takes up. Maybe you've got a problem with, them being on the way to a well sub-500 season, yet folks getting worked up 2 weeks into last year and saying, playoff contender? Pac-12 championship contender? But that's not him. That's on the folks holding the microphone. That's not on Deion Sanders. So I think I'm playing devil's advocate a lot here. I just think the villain tag has been misplaced a little bit, if you want to call him that, when it comes to Deion Sanders. Now, here's a good one. In fact, I'm going to save this one for last, because one got brought to my attention that I wasn't going to think about. I'm glad someone mentioned it. TV networks, though, there's something to be said there. There's something to be said, and I'm sitting on the set of a major TV network. So it's a broad strokes conversation. And this goes beyond TV networks. It's an administrative sort of bureaucratic thing in general where the player and the fan are the last 2 entities that are sort of on the priority pecking order when decisions are being made. And maybe a lot of decisions are being made with the almighty dollar at the forefront, which is not new, but it just feels more and more as the inner workings of that stuff gets publicized that we take a back burner on that. I know you guys feel that way because I feel that way. And so, yeah, that, media rights deals being so hardwired that there's not wiggle room, like there's not an understanding that college football's worth what it's worth because of tradition, yet when you pay that big price tag, you don't respect the tradition. You don't understand that, hey, I know our deal says this, but maybe we should have special carve-outs so that Penn State could have their whiteout game against Ohio State or Michigan instead of just trying to figure out what's left after those hardwired network times are filled. I get it. I'm with you guys on that. You get no argument out of me. But the one that I wanted to get back to, pricing, is ridiculous. There's never been more money coming into these athletic departments. There's never been more money coming into these programs, and yet your concessions keep going up. The price of parking, if you can even get a parking pass, keeps going up. Every one of you who has been a lifelong season ticket holder knows good and well, you never get an email, you never get a letter in the mail physically that says, good news, the price got reduced on you this year. And it's not because it's needed. It's not because those extra nickels and dimes are going to bridge the gap budgetarily, unless that gap has been made through irresponsible spending. It's just that they know they can do it. That right there bothers me to no end, and I don't even suffer from it like some of you do. So yes, irresponsibly high pricing, a big villain for us all, but especially in college football. They don't do that at Academy Sports and Outdoors. I appreciate it. They let us go on the road. They are the wind in our sails when we take these road trips because we don't have to worry about whether we can get there and whether we need to cut cost. Academy's got it taken care of. They got you taken care of as well. It's back to sports time. It's back to school time. Academy's got you taken care of. I don't care if you need a grill. I don't care if you need a jacket because fall weather will eventually get here. Thank goodness. I don't care what you need. Academy Sports and Outdoors has it. And if you can't get there in person, academy.com has you hooked up. Guys, if you're new around here, and we get thousands of you per week that are new around here, just understand these folks were with us when we didn't have the audience we have now. And so we really, really appreciate them. And they make sure that this show is free to you. And we appreciate that. I hope you do as well. Give them a visit. You're going to buy the stuff they have there anyway. Give them a visit. Academy.com if you can't get there in person. Let me ask you some big questions I have in college football this year. We got Ryan Day on the show in a few minutes, so stay tuned for that. Will we have this group of Tier 1 teams emerge? Are we going to have elite teams in college football this year? If you look at the preseason odds over at FanDuel, yeah, Georgia's favored. Ohio State's up there. You're going to have Texas up there. Alabama's not going to be too far away. And Bama's been in that conversation for a long time. Oregon's there. My question is not, will those teams be good? Of course those teams will be good unless you have devastating injury. My question is, will they be elite? Because really the difference maker in any college football season will be no different now than it has always been. I don't care if you have 50 playoff spots or 2 of them. If you have elite teams, if you have programs that are top 5 recruiters with top 5 staffs and they separate, that's ball game. You may have a million different routes, but you're getting to the same destination. That team is either going to be your national champ or that team's going to lose to someone else who was one of the small handful of teams that can match them. So if we have elite teams start to emerge this year, it may be Georgia, it may be Ohio State, it may be any of the number of teams that you saw on your screen there. My question is, number one, who are they? How many of them are there? And if they avoid, like critical late season injury, quarterback goes down or something like that, then you can have fun talking about the 11 seed. You can have fun talking about an automatic bye for the Big 12 champ. They're not going to win the title. But if you don't have that, as I've said many times over the past month, if Texas or Georgia's defensive line situation really does make them vulnerable, if those receivers that they brought in to replace the ones that left for Quinn Ewers in Texas, if they're not dynamite, if Trevor Etienne doesn't run the ball like the machine Georgia thinks he will be, if Kalen DeBoer doesn't transition that offense to his way of doing things in year one, if Dan Lanning and company do have a limited ceiling on Dylan Gabriel and maybe the level of physicality does bite him a time or two, if that stuff starts to happen, then all of a sudden we get into November and you're looking around, you're saying, hold up now. Every team's either already got a loss or the ones that don't have a loss feel like they're living on borrowed time. If that's the case, then all of a sudden you get in that playoff, whether I like it being expanded or not, you get in that situation, and it is what it is, and that may very well feel like a win and anything can happen sort of situation. I think about teams like Tennessee. Okay, Tennessee does not strike me as an elite team, but they could be a really good team. If we're living in a world where we've got a couple of elite teams, I don't think much about Tennessee in November, unless they shock me and they're one of those teams. But if we're living in a world of just a whole lot of really good teams and a couple of very good teams, no elite teams, Tennessee's the kind of thing where I don't care if they're 5 seed or 12 seed. If they're in, they could win the whole thing. And so Ole Miss strikes me as that as well. Even if they're not themselves elite, if no elite teams emerge around them, you let Jackson Dart in there, you let Lane Kiffin in the playoff, and anything could happen. That's the first thing that I'm wondering about there. Now I got another question for you. You know I rarely talk about this time of year. Who is going to win the Heisman Trophy this year? The top 24, I think, are all quarterbacks at FanDuel right now. So it would be a solid guess in a year. This year is no different that a quarterback will win this thing. Dylan Gabriel right now is the odds-on favorite to win the Heisman Trophy. And if you're not watching on YouTube, let me just quickly read you the list here. It's Dylan Gabriel, it's Carson Beck, Quinn Ewers, Will Howard, Nico Iamaleava at Tennessee's there at 5 or 6. Jalen Milroe's there, Dart's there, Nussmeier, Ward, Connor Wigman. So it's a bunch of quarterbacks, a whole lot of SEC and Big Ten there. which one of those guys is going to win it? Did I read the Heisman Trophy winner there? Will Riley Leonard come out of nowhere, for example? We went to slide 2 here. Avery Johnson at Kansas State, little ways down the list. DJU, maybe he blows it up at Florida State. 2 names stand out to me. Colin, if you're listening back in Nashville, I miss you, by the way. If you're listening back in Nashville, could you do me a favor? Could you go back to the first slide right quick? Because I did want to talk to you about a couple of guys. The first one is Jackson Dart. So Jackson Dart is sitting there 7th in the odds market. Picture this with me. If it's a normal Ole Miss season, forget about it. If it's a special Ole Miss season, they'll be one of the stories in college football this year. If they're playing relevant football late in November, if they're in the SEC championship, or even if they're not, but they're in the playoff, Jackson Dart's had a big year. And that receiving room has gone crazy. And it may very well be that, sentiment is on his side. I mean, think about how long it's been since we talked about Ole Miss and that kind of breadth. And if they are to fulfill on that, so if they hit their max top-end potential, it's not because defense carried them. Like, if Ohio State wins this year, there's no guarantee Will Howard did anything Heisman-worthy. If Ole Miss wins this year, there is almost certainty that Jackson Dart did something Heisman-worthy. So I think about him, and then you can take everything I just said, and you can pretty much copy and paste it for Miami. If Miami has an 8-win season, forget about it. Forget about Cam Ward. If Miami is in the ACC championship game, if Miami is a fringe playoff contender or they're in the college football playoff, by default, it means that Cam Ward blew up in Coral Gables this year. And so same thing. If Miami's back and Cam Ward's the reason why, and good and well that dude can put up huge numbers. He's got 7,000 passing yards last 2 years, and this could be the best year he's had. And they're going to feature him because they invested a lot in him. They don't invest in guys like that to hide him. If they're there at the end of the race, Cam Ward's been a big reason why. And so he's sitting down there like 9th or 10th in the odds. Well, those are 2 guys I've circled. I've already put some money on Cam Ward. I've put a little bit on Jackson Dart too. So if you're asking me who I've bet on those 2 guys. I have not put money on anyone else. That doesn't mean I'd favor them. If I opened up Pate State Sportsbook right now, I myself wouldn't favor them. But there's a difference in where you find value versus who you literally think should be number 1, 2, 3. I'd be very interested, by the way, in the comments section. Who do you guys think is your Heisman winner this year? Let's go bold predictions right quick. Then I'm going to bring Ryan Day on the show. He had some good things to say. We taped it a little bit earlier. He had some good things to say. Bold prediction time this year. What do you believe as a Pate State collective, as a community, that you would bet your own money on? The first one is going to be polarizing because the first one has to do with LSU. John in Sacramento, California says LSU makes the playoff this year. Where would you put that on the boldness scale? Now, I know a lot of you, if you're not LSU fans, your immediate default was to laugh and say, ha, yeah, right. Well, we're putting 12 teams in this thing this year. So if your over-under win total is 9.5 and you hit the over, like, think about it. LSU just hits the over, 10 wins. They're in the playoff. I don't care if they're not in Atlanta. They're in the playoff. So we're not talking about 6.5 or 7.5 here. 9.5 is the win total. It's a top 12 roster. There may be holes there. I think there are defensively. Like, candidly, I think 9.5 is a shade high in the odds market. But it doesn't matter. I'm not running the sports book. I'm not running FanDuel. They are. They are plus 128 to make the playoff. They're minus 158 to miss it. That is a straight-up prop bet that you can get at FanDuel right now. Yes, no, make, miss the playoff. Man, this is only an 8. This is not the boldest thing in the world. Like, I may not myself be predicting LSU to make the playoff, but your total's 9.5. You got a top 12 roster. You got not Ryan Day. You got Brian Kelly, who's done it before. That's an 8. That's not the most bold thing in the world to me. Next up, this would be a little bolder. Joe from Nottingham in the UK. No one conference has more than 3 total teams in the playoff. Now, you got to thread a needle on this. So I'm going to call this an 8.75 on the boldness scale. We did our predictions the other day. If you missed that, it's on the YouTube channel right now. I had 4 SEC teams in. I had 3 Big Ten teams in. So I did have a conference going over 3. I had another one at 3. I think if this happens, and it's possible, that means that there was big separation in the SEC. So there were a few big-time teams, or maybe it's the Big Ten as well. There were a few big-time teams, and then there was a big gap. Okay, so you got a bunch of obvious, you got a few obvious, and then a bunch of no, they can't be in. Notre Dame has to be in. They take up a spot. Maybe you get 2 G5s in. You certainly have 1 in. I think this could also be a scenario where a lot of 10-2s got selected over some 9-3s. Because there's still that world. Remember, we don't know how this is going to go. There's still that world where you've got like a 10-2 Missouri, or maybe a 9-3 Missouri, and a 10-2 from the Big Ten or a 10-2 from the Big 12 or ACC gets taken over them. That could very well happen. We don't know how the committee's going to interpret strength of record, strength of schedule. So that's an 8.75 for me. Next up, interestingly, Luke Fickell was sitting at this desk here no more than, I don't know, an hour ago as we're talking in Indianapolis. And DJ hits us and says Wisconsin finishes the season 500 or worse. That's an 8. I think they could be better than that. It's totally contingent on quarterback play. It's totally contingent on a guy who lost his mojo in Tyler Van Dyke finding it in a new place. Grant you that. It's contingent on Phil Longo and that offense just flat out being better than they were expected to be and they were last year. This is a volatile team. Okay, their win total, unlike LSU, their win total is 6.5. It is down there in that lower range. So odds makers aren't all that dissimilar in their expectation to this prediction. They've just got to win their toss-up games. Minnesota, at Nebraska, at Iowa, at Rutgers, Purdue. These are toss-up games. I don't expect them to beat Bama. At USC will be tough for them. Oregon will be tough for them. They win their toss-up games, they're over 500. However, I said that way too easily. I'm putting an 8 on this. Because they're over in the win total 6.5, that's not the craziest thing in the world. That's an 8. And lastly, now we got a chalice-worthy bold prediction here. Paper pop. Malik Murphy. Tyler says Malik Murphy is at the Heisman presentation as a finalist. Malik Murphy's not at Texas anymore, kids. He went to Duke. And everyone's new there. His offensive line, 5 for 5. They're brand new. New starters. They've got a new staff, obviously. Manny Diaz is the head coach there. I keep on saying this, even though a lot of you know that, because I know some of you are just tuning in again because you recognized the offseason, which we don't believe in, but if you wanted to take it, that's your right. So their win total is 5.5. Duke's got to overachieve massively. Even if he's got big numbers, their team has to overachieve massively, or else they're not sending a dude off a 6-6 team to New York City. They're just not going to do it. There are too many other good players out there. So I'm calling this a 9.75. Love Malik Murphy, but that dude's not been a full-time starter yet. You've got newness everywhere. Also, it's Duke, so he's not going to be surrounded by star power like these other guys that he's competing against will be. So that's a 5. That's a 9.5. Their under win total is 5.5. Pretty bold there from Malik Murphy. You can bet that right now. You know that, right? Like you can make the bold prediction, but also if you really believe in that, you can have it to FanDuel and you can bet whatever you want to. You can head over to FanDuel and not bet anything. You can head over to FanDuel and just look around if you want to. They are the exclusive odds provider of our show. They make it really fun. We checked the other day. I mean, producer Jesse and I were getting ready for the show. They had some props up there we didn't even know about, and I have like bi-weekly calls with those folks. So check out FanDuel. As we get closer to the season, I'll have more and more information about how I expect our season to go with them. I mean, Friday Night Lines now. If you're a long timer, like if you're a ride or die with us, you know what Friday Night Lines is. If you're new, you're going to love Friday Night Lines. It's really dirty and off the grid and unproduced, and it's great. So FanDuel's right there with us. They love Friday Night Lines. So they take care of us. They'll take care of you. Appreciate the folks at FanDuel. Okay, we are a week or two away from camp opening in Columbus, Ohio. Pate State Speaker Series was in Columbus earlier this spring. We got Ryan Day for 40 minutes. I figured maybe that wasn't quite enough. So we had the Buckeye head coach join us, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you this will wrap our show up. So I appreciate you guys watching. Our crew here in Indianapolis has been beyond phenomenal all day. Our crew back in Nashville taking care of us as well. This is our sit-down earlier today with Ohio State head coach Ryan Day. Ohio State head coach Ryan Day joining us. Greece is in the rearview mirror. You've taken the vacation. You've got fall camp a couple of weeks away. Where's your mindset? Absent media days, outside of media days, where's your mindset right now?
With the team. When you think about where the preseason, is in terms of, the year, you start with the winter and then you go to the spring and you have your summer. And the preseason is really critical to come together and build the foundation for the entire year. And so, just working really hard to make sure everything's in order for that, make sure that guys are, prepared for that at a high level. We'll give them a little bit of like 3 days off here before we start for next week, but making sure that everything's organized in terms of the scripts and making sure the staff's ready and prepared.
How different is the dynamic of what a college football players' year is now versus 20 years ago? Guys legitimately went home and yet largely no clue what they were doing. You send them home with a program. You hope they're doing the right thing, and you kind of cross your fingers when you get them back. How different is that dynamic right now? Even though you're not with them every day, you still have a really much better finger on the pulse of, like, what the dynamic is, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you used to have like a summer job, and then you come back and you do a conditioning test, and then you figure out who's in shape and who's put the work in for that year, and then you kind of got yourself into shape during camp. Now it's a year-round thing, and so completely different. And we're allowed to do some things on the field with the guys now, and Nick's done a great job of getting them into shape. So it is year-round, and we know it's going to be a long season. So that doesn't change how we're going to enter a preseason camp, though. It's got to be physical. It's got to be a great camp. Our guys got to really build their foundation.
When I was up there in spring, that was around the time everyone was making a huge deal about your portal additions. And you were really quick to say, hey, pay attention to who stayed. Pay attention to the guys who originally committed here, and they've been there the whole time, and they've had some ups. They've had some really high-profile downs. Well, now you've gone through a summer with them, and now you sort of get to the fall. When do you get a feel for the dynamic that a team is taking on?
Yeah, it didn't take long with this group, and you're seeing it every day in the summer right now. There's an edge to them. There's an urgency. There's a purpose. It's a group that's been around. I would just, on the trip here with Denzel Burke, and we were just talking about entering preseason camp as a senior as opposed to a freshman or a sophomore. Completely different. You're just trying to survive almost in preseason camp, where now, like, you know exactly what to expect, and you can be very, very intentional in everything that you're doing. You also know what to expect for the season. All those things matter when you're talking about guys who have been in the program 4 and 5 years. So to me, that's the key, and that's the whole point of this whole team right now, and the focus of it is that you got a bunch of guys that decided to come back and forego an opportunity to go to the NFL, and that the reason for that is because their love for their brothers and love for Ohio State. They didn't have to do that, and that's a great start to a program. And then as it continued to go, because every year is different. It's easy to say, well, it just carries over from last year. It doesn't. It's not even close. You got to rebuild your entire identity year in and year out. That's my opinion. And so this group has come together. The camaraderie strong, the brotherhood strong, and so now it's time to get out in the field and start playing.
When people think Ohio State offense over the last several years, they think of studs at wide receiver. It's the first thing that comes to mind. When you get to the end of a year, and then roughly the personnel you have in a coming year like this, is there ever a thought that, hey, I can probably do most anything I want to? I want to shift 20% over here. I want our identity to be a little bit more this, maybe a little bit less that. Or is it, I like where we're at, and we're just going to continue to swing every year until we get it?
Well, that's a great question, because after every year, after the dust settles and the smoke clears and everything, you got to figure out what is going well, and you got to continue to enhance it, and what needs to get changed, what needs to get fixed. And there's some things that we've identified. I'm not going to get into all those right now, but certainly one of them is making sure you have the right people in the right seats, and that is a critical thing. And having Chip there now, having Jim on as the two coordinators, I think was very, very important to get solidified. But also the players and having those, but also schematically and some of the things that we did. But again, not getting into all those, but making sure you identify, because every year you learn. And I've learned a lot. And especially in the last couple of years, and we need to figure out, like, even coming off of last year, that last game, why didn't we finish that last drive? Why couldn't we get a stop sooner at the end of the game on defense? What was it that held us back from winning that game last year? And you could point to a few things, but it's easy to say, well, you're a drive or two away, but the truth is we need to leave no doubt. In those games, you can't leave it to 1 or 2 plays. You got to leave no doubt. And so that's been a theme for us in the offseason.
People throw the word pressure around with head coaches all the time. They throw it around with you all the time. I personally, selfishly wish folks could spend a day in the building with you, but they can't. So the closest we can do is I can ask you, describe how you view the pressure of your job and how it may be different than a headline on a website or like a YouTube thumbnail.
Well, that's the case when you step into that seat. So this is not something new that's happened at Ohio State just in the last few years. That's what you're signing up for. Now, it doesn't make it easy, but it's the truth. And you want to be relevant. You want to have it all on the line. And that's what it's like every single year when you're at Ohio State. But you do it for your family. You do it for your players. You do it for your staff and for your coaches. But also you do it for all the fans who love Ohio State. And that matters a lot to me. And that's why we work so hard, and that's why we work so hard to get this team together again this year to go out there and reach our goals.
I know you guys have been ultra cognizant if you reach that ultimate goal of how many more snaps that will put per average on a player as opposed to the way it used to be in the old model. So not in the nip and tuck games, but in games that are comfortable, and you guys have several of them every year, how differently do you manage workload on players in the fourth quarter than you would in the past?
I think we're all trying to figure that out right now, but we have got to build depth for sure. I do think now with the coach-to-player communication, you're going to see more huddling. So I think you're going to see some lower-scoring games just naturally. It happened a little bit last year with the running clock. After the first down, outside of 2 minutes. So all those things are going to come into play. You may start to see a little bit more of that going on. And as you look at all the games that are going on, you'll see probably a lower number of snaps across the board. But you got to play depth. That's just the bottom line. You got to build depth because not only is it the length of the season, but it's also, if you take an injury somewhere along the line, these guys got to step up and play their best football at the end of the season.
Caleb Downs is a phenomenal athlete. We saw him as a true freshman at Alabama last year. You guys have him now. And there's been a lot of chatter about what kind of role he could have or how multiple his role could be on your team. Aside from being a stalwart in your secondary, anything else I should expect when I watch Ohio State this fall?
Well, we'll start with that.
Okay.
But returning is certainly on the plate, and we'll see about the running back situation. But he has taken a few snaps, but we're going to try to solidify him as a safety first, returner second, and then we'll kind of go from there. But he does have the ability, and that's something that we did talk about during the recruiting process because he wants to have an opportunity to be a Heisman Trophy candidate. And it's one way to do that is get the ball in your hands. But we're going to start with safety and kind of build from there.
Ryan Day, we appreciate it, brother.
There you go.
Thank you.
All right.